Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And happy summertime. So good. That's cool. I know. Welcome to Boulder, Scotland. And I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. This week in Torah study, in my Monday Torah study, somebody asked, what was such the big deal of what the spies did that we'd have such a harsh punishment? Why? They came up back with a bad report. What's the big deal about it? And so I ask, what is the big deal about that? Why would it be that instead of a 2-year process from leaving, the redemption from Egypt to the entering into the land, why did we have to go from 2 years to 40 years? What was so wrong of what they did that their punishment came to be what it was? So I really want to talk about that because I think what happened with the spies highlights for us some of the basic elements of the spiritual and social journey. Because remember, Judaism isn't just a spiritual journey. It's also a social journey. It's what happens in community, how we listen to each other, how we talk to each other, how we treat each other. And so some of the things, there are 5 things I really want to talk about today. I want to talk about perception and fear. What we think we see and how we can have what Chris Rock, the great sage, calls selective outrage. He says we perceive things and we select what we're outraged about. There's not always a consistency there. So what is the perception of what we see? And then what is fear? Not the kind of fear that is, the fear that is the developing of the ability to tremble in awe. Tremble in awe, that yirah. But the kind of fear that knocks your knees and keeps you inside and not engaging or not developing. Or as I like to call fear, false evidence appearing real. Fear. Very much what we see. So I want to talk about perception and fear today. I want to talk about faith and trust, bitachon and emunah. Because this is really the foundation, the bedrock of the religious journey. And then I want to talk about speech. And so we'll kind of look at these things. But I want to remind us that as we were entering Israel, what really was about to happen was the hope for a conscious society that was grounded in ethical monotheism. I mean, think about this. We're talking circa 1250 BCE. Okay, that's a long time ago. And ethical monotheism was a new idea. It was something innovative, something creative, something new coming in. And this, and it included a covenant with distinguishing cultural factors, a common ancestry, and specific tribal voices. Let's not forget, there are 12 tribes, each with its own distinct personality, characteristics, way of approaching and being in the world. You look at the example of Zebulun and Issachar, as the tradition talks about. Issachar is like the Torah. I'm going to sit and study. And Zebulun is the merchant. And the two of them work together. Because I'll tell you, Torah scholarship doesn't bring in the big bucks. Talk to me about that later if you don't believe me. And so we have, God's expectations and hope for the spiritual elevation of this people is really important. And there are ways in which we look at our internal fears and doubts and limitations of who we are. The Torah talks about this. Anytime you see Amalek pop up in a parsha, doesn't happen that often, but it's because there's a great danger that faith and trust have gone on vacation. We see it in Beshalach, in Exodus, when they were just, the Amalek attacked them after they had doubt. We see Amalek is mentioned again in this parsha. Very important to see. We have this thing of free will. There's so many things that I do not have control over. I so many things, but here's what I do have control over. What I see and how I process things, how I use discernment. And I have choice in how I speak. I have choice of whether or not I see somebody with a good eye. These are things that I can do. And there's this very strong belief that if one holds their wholeness in these areas, that even if it's crazy without, by holding one's center, one can radiate out, or as it was said, was it Margaret Mead, be the change you want to see in the world? Was that her? Back to the spies. They saw amazing miracles. From the plagues, right, to the parting of the sea, the manna, the water coming from no place, their GPS system that took them wherever they wanted to go, right? They saw the flashes at Sinai. They saw God's glory come through the temple. But it seems like it was too much too soon. It seems like their nervous system could not hold it. They could not hold the changes. They couldn't adapt. They didn't have the bandwidth for the journey ahead. There was not enough faith or trust. Let's define faith. Emunah. The highest spiritual state possible. A felt sense realization of the presence of a divine intelligence. A felt sense that there is a divine will and a plan, even if it can't be seen. Faith. Trust. Trust is that trust is like confidence. Yeah, that confidence, that security, that trust that things are going to be the way they should be because of the faith that exists. And so they couldn't, the spies come in, these 12 spies, and 10 of them, maybe 11. We'll talk about Caleb in a second. They didn't have enough faith and trust to believe they could manage against the fortified cities and perception of the giants, the Nephilim and Anakites. Now, I went on a little bit of a Google rabbit hole today. Is there giants? Were there really giants? I mean, every culture has them, just like every culture has dragons. Is that mythical or historical? Let's leave that alone for now. But they were scared, we know that. And Caleb, what did he do? Does anybody remember what Caleb did? Because he might have been.
What he did is essentially say, okay, he did this, really? Did he really do these things? And he turns it from the negative, essentially, to the positive. He flips it. Just when you think, oh, he's going along this and everything, oh no.
Because he went to Hebron. Is that what you were going to say?
He also was the one who said, yes, we can.
That's right. Because he went as they were doing their bad reports. We'll talk about that in a second. He went to Hebron. And what was in Hebron? Yes! He went to the ancestors. He went to the ancestors and he did the work. Joshua, who had Moses' hand on him, right? Joshua had that pure faith that Moshe had. Caleb was swayed, perhaps, but he went to Hebron to sit at the kever, at the keverim of the ancestors. And he got his mind right and held steadfast from there. He had doubt, and he went and did something about it instead of letting himself spin into false evidence appearing real. What does the Torah say? Vayotziu divat ha'eretz, and they gave this bad report. This word divat, it's like divat is a whispering, a defamation, an evil report. And I think once we see, not only in this story, but y'all, anybody read the news? Anybody here read the news? Right? Do we see false reports and fake news all the time?
We live in the States, of course.
It is phenomenal how as I'm reading this week, I cannot stop thinking how exactly it is like this in the United States news cycle today. And it's interesting, I was reading one report that said, he called it the 1990 rule. And he said that 1% of the people on social media are putting out this content, 9% are engaging in it, and 90% are just watching.
Wow. Wow.
Think about how much 1% has an effect in creating this false content where people then get to the point where they say, I can't tell, what did they say? This is false land. It eats those who dwells in it, and even more. All the people that we saw in its midst, they're men. There's these giants, and each time they say something in this false evidence appearing real, it becomes more and more and more real to them until they come back with fake news. It's not that, yes, the cities were fortified, but maybe one town had a couple remnant of these really big people, but not all the land. But in their false evidence appearing real, it became all the land. And they came and they brought this, tumor, I'm going to call it, of a lack of faith and a lack of trust in God, and it spread like wildfire. Learning curves, nervous system. What happens if something's too big to hold? I don't know the older generation in this room. I'm not sure if you know that in younger generation, there's a lot of conversation right now about nervous system regulation. And how do you regulate your nervous system? How do you notice when you start to move into sympathetic activity? How do you notice when you begin to lose your breath? How do you notice when you're no longer centered and grounded? And this is becoming very important for this generation to do, because us older folks in the room, we're not handing them the best world. Let's be frank about it. And so they're learning to take control of internal nervous system, and we can do the same as well. Very important things to do, because what happens when they came in with their bad report, it just swept, and everybody got caught up in that nervous system activation of fear, concern, worry, and it became a mess. So does this make sense? So what's at stake here? The Rambam defines, we already defined faith and trust, so we'll let that one go. But it's just a reminder, nothing can exist and no activity can occur without Hashem. Ein od milvado. We have to come back and understand what is our speech that we want to do that is good. How do we pay attention to be sure that we're not spreading things that activates, be it gossiping or rumoring, and more important, how do we social media today, news today, it can activate us. How do we always be sure that we stay regulated and develop discernment to know truth from non-truth? It is very possible. How do we do this? By clarifying our intentions. Number 2, we face our fears. Number 3, we glance at our tzitzit. Tzitzit is in this parsha. Tzitzit is here to remember. They're here to remind us. Maybe it's to remind us of the sky. Maybe it's to remind us of the sea. Maybe it's to remind us of the floor of God's throne, which is this color. Maybe it's to remind us of that blue in the candle flame, that place, that part, that, there's the wick, materiality, and think of spirituality as the flame. And the blue part is the one that sits between the real world and the spiritual world and can stand upright and tall because we're following the mitzvot. As much as the mitzvot as we can. As much as the mitzvot as we can drink into our lives in order to honor that beautiful ethical monotheism that was the whole point of this endeavor in the first place. Facing our fears. I want to kind of close with something that the Piasetzner said. The Piasetzner Rebbe is my hero. He was the rabbi of the Warsaw Ghetto, and he wrote quite a bit from, between 39 and when he was sent to Auschwitz. And he's talking about conflict, and that for this parsha, he's like, in order for us to really move forward, not only do we have to work on our faith and trust, not only do we have to really allow our perception to match reality as much as possible, not to let our unconscious fears take over, we also have to work with conflict. Because as I said, this is spiritual, but it's also social. Judaism is social. Our relationships matter. So he said you have to have good conflict resolution. So this is what he said. It's best to engage in a sort of inner dialogue, a conversation with oneself anytime you're ready to meet conflict or your own fears. He says it's important to avoid blame, to avoid self-justification. He says we examine ourselves about the higher motivations and the lower impulses which motivate our behavior. We do not shame ourselves or dwell on our misdeeds. We instead try to become aware that we have a variety of inner states. We try to notice when we are seeing and acting from our higher mind, our expanded consciousness, so that we can not want to go back to the limit stage of consciousness. Now this is me again. Mitzrayim, the tight, narrow places. They wanted to run back to the tight, narrow places because the uncertainty of the future was too much. Here we are with an uncertain future. Here we are in a realm where people see things that aren't there, and fake news is every day, just as them. And we have the opportunity by going within ourselves. I think that was a ring of affirmation, I'm pretty sure. That we go inside ourselves and work with our fears. We stay connected to each other with a good eye. And we have a chance to get through this. Thank you. Shabbat shalom, everybody.